Hello YouTube, Dave here again. This is part 2 of my series of videos for first-time players for the Dungeons & Dragons game, or even role-playing games in general. The first episode I did sort of a explanation of some of the basic ideas of what role-playing was, an explanation of the dice and how we phrase them, and just some of the basic mechanics and stuff like that. Before I get started, I do want to say I did make an error in that video, and I had said that for the 5th edition of the game, if you rolled a natural 1 or a natural 20 on a saving throw, the 1 would be an automatic failure and the 20 would be an automatic success. And with 5th edition, that's actually not the case. And I'm glad that somebody pointed it out to me, because that's the way I was running it. I think it's just because I was so used to that being the way with things in 3rd edition 3.5, for example, that it just almost became ingrained. So I'm glad somebody pointed that out. I just wanted to clarify that if you saw the first one. I was definitely wrong there. But for this video, what I want to do is just kind of walk you through the steps of creating your first character. And I'm just going to do a quick character generation here from start to finish, and hopefully it'll be informative. So we'll get started here. Alright, so the first thing that you're going to want when you go to create a character is some sort of concept of what character you want to play. If you're not overly familiar with Dungeons & Dragons, like if this is your first time ever playing a tabletop role-playing game, you don't or you shouldn't be expected to have like the world's most unique or creative character. It's totally okay, especially for your first character, to draw inspiration from other sources. So things like perhaps, novels or graphic novels, for example, could be a good source of inspiration. If you've read some fantasy novels and you liked a particular character and you want to play that kind of character, then, this would be a great opportunity for you to do that. You could also be inspired by things like, movies, for example, like the Lord of the Rings movies. If you wanted to play, a character like Legolas or Gimli or Aragorn or even Gandalf, or perhaps even somebody like Sam or Merry or Pippin, then, again, those opportunities do exist in Dungeons & Dragons. So, stuff like movies could also be another source of inspiration. Don't shy away from certainly just wanting to recreate a character, especially for your first time out. It's totally okay. And another source of inspiration could be video games. For example, if you play games like Dragon Age or World of Warcraft or things like Skyrim, which I no longer have, if you created a character in that, it's something that you could certainly go for. If you're completely and totally new to the fantasy genre, like I was when I first started playing, my recommendation would be to stick to one of the 4 classic character classes. Either a cleric, which is a healer, a fighter, which is pretty self-explanatory. They just, basically bash things with swords until they stop twitching. A rogue, which is kind of an in-between. They can fight, but they're not the most physically tough. So you're more of a supplementary character. You want to get in and fight things that the fighter is currently engaged with, so that you're using the fighter almost as sort of like a bodyguard or a shield, and you just kind of stick in a few shots here and there. Or you could be a spell-slinging wizard. There are certainly other classes. I mean, there's Bard, Barbarian, Monk, Ranger, Paladin, stuff like that. But if you're completely new, I would recommend sticking to one of the 4 classics. And in general, I always recommend, if someone's completely and totally new to role-playing, to the fantasy genre, never played a tabletop RPG before in their lives, I always tend to recommend like a fighter, just a straightforward fighter, because you only have to worry about doing one thing. But, it's entirely up to you. I would recommend, if you have a player's handbook, or if you've downloaded the free Basic Rules PDF, just kind of going through that a little bit, maybe reading up on the different character classes. Now, one of the things that's kind of unique to the 5th edition of the game is more of an emphasis on backgrounds. So it's one of those things that, I always, just going to adjust the camera here. You may want to look at some of the background options. Like, for example, if you wanted your character to be sort of a hermit, for example, somebody who's lived a life of isolation and seclusion before you began your adventuring career, then that's something that you could kind of do. I mean, if you were inspired by Lord of the Rings, you could almost say that Aragorn was sort of like a hermit, or possibly an outlander, which I completely went by. or yeah, someone like an Outlander. The backgrounds have a great way of sort of giving you some things to keep in mind when you actually start role playing the character. So take a few moments and just kind of read through them, see if something strikes out at you, in particular when it comes to the backgrounds. But other than that, kind of keep yourself open to ideas. If there's anything in particular that you seem interested in, then talk to your DM, talk to other players in the group, and see what they can do to help you kind of bring that character to life. Even if they just suggest which class, race, and maybe background to take, it could certainly be helpful. So, ask the other players in the group. Try to come up with some ideas. Don't feel obligated to play the cleric or the healer just because nobody else in the group is playing one. If it's your first time, you really shouldn't be forced into a particular role, because if you don't enjoy that class, it may hamper your enjoyment of the game and you may not want to play again. So just keep that in mind. Draw inspiration from other sources, other media. That's totally okay. You don't have to be the most original player at the very beginning, and I don't think anybody should expect that of you. So just a few notes on things like character concepts, and next we'll get into actually generating the character. Alright, so we've taken some time, we've thought about what kind of character we want to make. I'm going to make one of my favorite types of characters to play, so I'm going to make an Elven Ranger in this particular video. So now that I know that, I want to be a ranger, I want to focus in archery, and I want to be an elf, it's time to actually physically create the character. So one of the first things that we're going to do is figure out how exactly you're going to determine the ability scores. Now, Dungeons & Dragons uses 6 different attributes that govern your character. So there's strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Hopefully I'm right about this. I believe I covered that in my first video. In case I didn't, or in case you didn't see that one, strength is just your physical ability to swing a weapon, to hit things as hard as you can. So it applies to melee attacks, damage, and things like athletics checks. Dexterity is your agility and hand-eye coordination. So how good are you at dodging out of the way of attacks? How accurate are you with, like a bow, for example? Constitution is sort of like your physical health, how easy it is for you to resist things like poisons or diseases, and it helps you with your hit points, how much damage you can take before you die. Intelligence is basically how smart you are. It governs things. If you're a wizard, it's your major ability score for casting spells, so spells are dependent on that if you're a wizard. Wisdom is like reasoning and logic, and it's something that clerics use for their spells. And then there's finally charisma, which is sort of like your force of personality, your ability to persuade others, things of that nature, and certain classes like the bard and the sorcerer, I believe, use that as their main ability score. So now that we know what the scores are, it's time to create them. And there's several different methods for determining ability scores. So I'm going to go over all of them here so that you know. And the first thing you definitely want to do is talk to your DM about how he or she goes about creating character stats. So which method do they use? The ones that are covered in the D&D 5th edition rules. I'm going to start with the basic array. So it's a set series of numbers that you just fill in however you want. So they're predetermined. You can have, like, it's a 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. So if you were a fighter, you would put 15, for example, in your strength if you were fighting with a melee weapon, or your dexterity if you were fighting with a ranged weapon, and you just kind of go down there. So depending on your class, you would select your ability scores as they are important to you. So you want to know what that class does. If you're a fighter, for example, you don't want to put if you use these, you don't want to put your 15 in charisma and then have your 8 in strength, because that would be kind of pointless. May make for an interesting role-playing character, but I don't think it would make for the most effective in combat. So that's the prearranged ability scores. The next one I want to talk about would be the point buy system. And I don't really like this system. I don't really recommend it, and hopefully your DM doesn't use it. I just find it to be a bit underwhelming. But it's a way that I think a lot of organized play, for example, would use either the standard array or the point buy system. And basically you start with 8s in all of your ability scores. So you would have 6 8s to start with. and you have 27 points that you can spend on your ability scores to increase it. Now, things like, you would think that, you could just buy them at a 1-for-1, but that's not really how it works, at least not to a point. For example, if you want to have a 10 instead of an 8, so you just want to have a 0, you don't want it to be a positive or negative modifier, it's going to cost you 2 points. So for the first few scores, it's actually a 1-for-1. Like to go from 8 to 13 is 5 points, for example, which makes sense. That's 1-for-1. If you want to go from 13 until up to 14, it's going to cost you 2 extra points to go from 13 to 14. So it starts at 1-for-1 until you get to 13, and then it costs an extra 2 points to go from 13 to 14, and then it costs an extra 2 points to go from 14 to 15. So of your 27 points, you could burn 9 of them just going up to a 15, which again is okay. It gives you the ability to have 3 ability scores at 15 and 3 at 8. I don't really recommend that. But if you wanted to try to maximize using that system, that's sort of a way you could go about it. They have an average that works out to basically 3 13s and 3 12s, which again doesn't make for the most effective or powerful character. So I don't really recommend that one unless you have no choice other than to use it. The third method is the one that I actually tend to use in my games, and the one that I like the most, and the one that's kind of the most old school, if you will, and that's rolling for your ability scores. So you would take 4 6-sided dice, 4d6, and you basically roll them. And you take the 3 highest numbers, you total them up, and that gives you sort of what your ability scores are. So I'm just going to try to roll these now. Hope they turn out good, because that's the method I'm going to use for my Elven Ranger. And what do we have here? Whoops, that one. There we go. So here we have a 1, a 6, and 2 3s. So you would take the 3s, so 3 and 3 is 6, and 6 is 12. So I'm just going to write that down on a scrap piece of paper. All right, and there's a 15 there. So I had, whoops, sorry, that's not a 15, that is a 13. Okay. And 6, 4, and 4. 6 and 4 is 10, so 14. Not looking super great right now, but we'll see what we can do. And that is 3 and 3 is 6, 5 is 11. We drop the 1. And 6, 4, 3 is 13. Drop the 2. So I don't think we're going to have the greatest character here, but that's okay. Oh, that's a little bit better. So we got a 6 and 6 is 12, 5 is 17, and we don't use the 3, so there we go there. So I'm just gonna made a little mistake there, got a little ahead of myself with my math. But just using this method, we have our ability scores here, 12, 13, 14, 11, 13, and 17. So I'm making a ranger who uses a longbow, so he focuses on ranged attacks. So I'm going to assign my ability scores as follows. Since I'm using range as my major ability, I'm going to put my 17 that I have here, I'm going to put that into my dexterity. After that, I kind of want to have a decent wisdom because rangers get spells at higher levels, so I'm going to put my 14 into wisdom, which governs my spell casting. I'm going to then, as somebody who does have the ability to get into melee and take damage, I want a relatively decent constitution. So of the 2 13s, one of those is going to be constitution. Then after that, what do we have left? Strength. I'm not really overly worried. I don't want to get into melee, so that's kind of a last resort. Just in case, though, I will put the other 13 into strength. And the 11, I think, will go into charisma, because as a character who lives out in the woods, he doesn't have the most social grace. And that leaves us with our 12 that goes into intelligence. So we now have our ability scores. Let's have a look at the book, and I decided to make an elf. So we're just going to go to the section on elves and determine what kind of elf that I want to be. So your classes, your races here give you basically a set bonus. So with an elf, all elves get +2 to their dexterity. So that's going to change that 17 to a 19, which is pretty good so far. After that, you just kind of go through, you see the other abilities. I'm just more interested right now about what other ability score I'm going to have increased. And it makes the most sense for my character to be a wood elf, where I am a ranger. So the wood elf's wisdom's score increases by 1. So I get +2 to my dexterity, +1 to my wisdom. So I now have my ability scores. It's time to put them on the sheet. So my strength is going to be a total of, so my strength is 13. My dexterity is 19. My constitution is 13. A 12 intelligence. A 15 for wisdom. And an 11 for charisma. So we now have our scores filled in. You can see there my horribly sloppy left-handed writing. So after that, we now have to come up with our modifiers. Now there's a chart in there. Basically, if you have an ability score of 10, it's a 0 modifier. Anything below that, for each even number after that, it's like a -1. So 8 would give you a -1. 7 would give you a -2, and stuff like that. So we don't have anything below 11, which is good. It's actually not a bad set of stats, but an 11 is still a 0 modifier since it's not an even number above 10, so it goes the same way. So 12 would be +1, 14 would be +2, 16 would be +3, 14 or 18 would be +4, and the even numbers in between would use the lower bonus. So a 13, for example, would be a +1, a 12 would be a +1, and we got the 13 there, so another +1. Our wisdom is 15, so that is a +2 modifier, because it has to be 16 before it gets up to +3. And for the 19, I actually get a +4, which isn't bad. So, whoops, I'm just going to fill in just a little bit of information here. So class is Ranger, going to be level 1. Race, Wood Elf. And so we're going to go from there. So we have our ability scores. Now we're going to look at our next thing we want to fill in are basically our skills and our saving throw proficiencies. So at first level, you start with a proficiency bonus of +2. So we're going to write that in. With our proficiency bonus, whatever we're proficient in, you'll get an extra +2 bonus on. So I'm going to start with the class itself. I just got to find the Ranger here. Alright, so a first level Ranger proficiencies. I'm just looking right now at the saving throws, which is strength and dexterity. So as you can see here, there is a little, some circles next to the saving throws. So strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. The ones that you're proficient in, you just shade in. And then you fill in your ability modifier. So the ones that we're not proficient in, you just carry the modifier over directly. So Constitution saves, I get +1. Intelligence saves, I get +1. Wisdom saves, I get +2. And Charisma saves, I get 0. So with Charisma, I just have to roll it as is. Strength, I have 1 plus my 2 proficiency, so I get +3. And for Dexterity, I have 4 plus my proficiency bonus +2, which brings me up to +6. After that, we have our skills. So choose 3 from the following: animal handling, athletics, insight, investigation, nature, perception, stealth, and survival. Before I choose those 3, it's time to go back and consult our backgrounds. And I've decided that I'm going to be an outlander for my ranger. So the backgrounds actually give you skill proficiencies, usually in 1 or 2 skills. So you get those automatically. So you want to have this chosen before you pick your ones for the class. So in this case, we have our list of skills going down here. And it's the same thing. It has like little circles there. So I'm just going to shade in athletics and survival. So when I go back to my list of ranger skills, I don't have to worry about picking either of those 2. So the ones that I have here gives me, let's see, animal handling, athletics, which I already have, insight, investigation, nature, perception, stealth, and survival. So I've decided that I want my character to be something of a hunter. So let's just pick, definitely want to pick perception. That's always a good one to have, especially if you're out hunting. Nature, again, would be a good one to have. And it's kind of up in the air between stealth and animal handling, and I think I'm going to go with stealth. So you basically go through and just fill in the numbers. I'm not going to do that here in the purpose of this video because it's basically the same thing as your saving throws, but you're doing a lot more of them. So we have that, we have our ability scores, we have our skill proficiencies, we have all that worked out. Let's go on to hit points for your first level character. So the ranger gets 1d10. Now at first level you get maximum, so I get 10 plus my constitution modifier. My constitution modifier is +1, so I have 11 hit points. So, and that's basically some of the basics there when it comes to just filling out the a lot of that. So the next thing we're going to go on to will be, well, we may as well go on to our background information and our equipment. So we'll do that here just in a moment. All right, and we're back. So just in the little break there, I just wanted to fill in a bunch of the other information. So I filled in all the skills, and I actually made a mistake. I forgot to mention that most races will give you some sort of skill proficiency. So for being an elf, I actually gained automatic proficiency in perception. So I decided that for my other skill that I was going to use, because I already had that one, I gave myself insight. So I think they all kind of help with hunting and stuff like that. So I filled all those out. I filled out my passive perception, and the passive perception is basically your perception bonus plus your perception bonus plus 10. So it's basically as if you had rolled a 10 what your on the dice when you're making a skill check. So I had him filled in a 16, which was wrong. It should actually be a 17. I was a little ahead of myself there, I guess. I also filled in the different like racial and class features that I kind of started with here. So, for example, I have Dark Vision 60 feet, Fey Ancestry, which gives me advantage on saves versus Charm, immunity to sleep, Trance, which means I only have to rest for 4 hours instead of 8 to get the full benefit of a full rest. You can only benefit from a full rest once in a 24-hour period, so it doesn't mean that I can get more full rests and as opposed to other races, unfortunately. And Mask of the Wild, so I can hide if only lightly obscured by like in natural surroundings, so like foliage, rain, snow, stuff like that. If it's enough to even lightly obscure me, I can attempt a stealth check. I also filled in my proficiencies in my languages, so I picked Common. Well, you start with Common and Elvish as an elf. My Outlander background actually gave me an extra language, so I took Orcish, just something so, you know, if you fight orcs early on, at least you'll understand what they're saying, especially if you're like sneaking up on a camp and trying to gain some information. Proficiencies, so for my class, I get light and medium armor proficiencies. I'm proficient with shields, simple and martial weapons, and my background gave me one musical instrument, so I chose a horn. I thought it would make the most sense. Now, as an elf, I actually have elven weapon proficiencies, like longsword, short sword, longbow, and shortbow. I didn't write that down for this particular character because I'm already proficient in all those with the weapon proficiencies. But if you were to play a class that didn't have access to all those, like a wizard or cleric or bard or something like that, then it's good to know that you're automatically proficient in those weapons. And basically what that means is if you make an attack roll with the weapon, you get to add your proficiency bonus to it. So that was basically all that there, and just some basic equipment. I kind of wanted to fill that in just to save some time. So my background gave me a staff, a hunting trap, a trophy, which from something that you killed, so I chose a bear claw, and a set of traveler's clothes and 10 gold. And my class gives me choices. So you can choose there's a few different ones that gives you choices between. You choose either option A or B. I chose leather armor over scale and a shield, I believe it was. 2 short swords, and you automatically get a longbow and 20 arrows, and I chose an explorer's pack over a dungeoneer's pack, for example. I also filled in my speed, my initiative, and just my, basically I chose a name for my character, and just wrote in the background there. And so that's basically up to speed now. So just going to go over the actual background information, the stuff that you can kind of do for your personality traits. So we have our Outlander here, and the first thing that we get is an origin. So you have the ability to either roll randomly, or you can kind of choose instead. So in this case, I'm going to make myself just here for my origin. I'm going to choose Hunter-Gatherer, because I kind of made my character based around the idea that he was a hunter. So that would make the most sense. I also get a feature Wanderer. So you have an excellent memory for maps and geography. You can always recall the general layout of terrain, settlements, and other features around you. In addition, you can find food and fresh water for yourself and up to 5 other people each day, provided that the land offers berries, small game, water, and so forth. So basically, I have a general idea of like the lay of the land, and I have ways of producing food for the rest of the player characters, so you don't have to worry so much about things like rations. So now we get into our personality traits and things of that nature. So again, they have them here. Just going to see if I can, it's kind of hard to get a better shot there, unfortunately. But you have a list. So the first thing is your personality trait, which is the very top one there. It gives you 8 options. You have your choice of either picking one, if it makes sense, or you could live life dangerously and just roll randomly. So I think just for fun, I'm going to roll all these randomly. So just one moment here, just grab the dice that I need. Alright, so for my personality trait, I'm going to roll. And I rolled a 5. So basically it says, I place no stock in wealthy or well-mannered folk. Money and manners won't save you from a hungry owlbear, which makes sense. I'm just going to write that down. So trait was 5. The next would be your ideal. And there's 6 options. I'm just going to roll these all randomly and see what we come up with. 6. Alright, so 6 is glory. So just a second there, that's ideal. Was 6. So glory, I must earn glory in battle for myself and my clan. Which is, again, kind of neat. If you're a hunter-gatherer, it makes sense that you want to be considered valuable for your clan and you want to rise to prominence in their eyes, I guess. So I actually kind of like that one. Next will be bond, 1 through 6. And I rolled a 1. And so for the bond, I'm just going to write this down. 1. My family, clan, or tribe is the most important thing in my life, even if they are far from me. So that actually really works well with the ideal that we had. You care about your clan, you want to earn glory for yourself and your clan, and they're the most important thing to you. Again, that's something that you can really work with. Now, my favorite of these last ones are the flaws. So there's 6 flaws. And they're kind of like a weakness of character. And I really like those because it's kind of fun to play up or role play the flaws or try to hide the flaws, for example. So the flaw is 4. So 4 is I am slow to trust members of other races, tribes, and societies. So even though I rolled all this stuff randomly, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense for the character, oddly enough. So that's just, again, one of the fun things that you can do, especially if you're new. You know, kind of just pick them at random, and it can really kind of build your character type thing, kind of give you some ideas of what your character thinks and how they feel. Again, you can also take the time to read over all of them and see if there's any one in particular that makes the most sense to you. It's entirely up to you, but I thought for the purpose of this video, I would just try to do something kind of fun and roll them up. So I'm just going to transcribe all that onto the sheet, and I'll be right back, and we'll go over our actual class features, and we'll get into kind of like the last things that I would need to fill in for this character, which would be armor class and weapon attacks and damages. So we're almost there. Alright, so I just filled in all that information there on this side of the character sheet, so all the role-playing stuff. So it's kind of interesting. Basically, my character is a hunter-gatherer, more comfortable basically in the woods than he is in a city. Does not particularly care for people who are, you know, come from money or, you know, are particularly like overly well-mannered, so basically like nobles and things of that nature. Doesn't particularly care for those types of individuals. He's quick to basically jump into battles that he could consider glorious for himself and bring glory to his clan. So he may be a little bit rash and try to attack things that maybe he shouldn't, or would at least be more receptive to doing it. So I wouldn't necessarily go and fight a giant dragon because, you know, it would be glorious if I defeated it, if it's something that would clearly get us all killed, but he would probably be in favor of doing it if it came down to like a vote, for example. He always wants to do things for the best of his clan. They mean more to him than anything else, and basically has a hard time trusting members of other races, tribes, and societies, so it takes a little bit of time before he will warm up to them. I think it's kind of an interesting character. I would enjoy role-playing sort of the flaw and the ideal, but you want to make sure that you're not a little too over the top. You can't just automatically say you distrust all the player characters because they're different from you, or always run off to attack things just because you're ideal kind of makes it sound like maybe you would. So you got to kind of find a bit of a balance there, but it's again, it's something that I think makes for some really great role-playing opportunities, and it can bring personality to a character when it's your first time playing and you're not really sure how to go about playing your character. These are things to keep in mind. So with that out of the way, let's talk about our class features, because we're basically at the home stretch now. I did already take the liberty of writing these in, just to save a little bit of time. But for the ranger, I'm making a first level ranger, so they get favored enemy and natural explorer. So with favored enemy, you get to choose some things. Now I chose the humanoids, but you choose a favorite enemy. In this case, you could choose like aberrations, beasts, celestials, constructs, dragons, elementals, fays, fiends, giants, monstrosities, oozes, plants, or undead. Or you could select two humanoid races as favorite enemies. So the other things are basically you choose one of those, or if you chose a humanoid, you could pick two different types. With your favorite enemy, you have advantage on survival checks to track your favorite enemy, as well as intelligence checks to recall information about them. And when you gain this feature, you also learn one language of your choice that is spoken by your favorite enemies. So for my favorite enemies, I chose orcs and goblinoids. So I already had Orcish as a language there. I don't know if it's going to focus or not, but so I chose Goblin. So now I can speak the language of both of those enemy types. And with Natural Explorer, you're particularly familiar with one type of natural environment. You're adept at traveling and surviving in such regions. Choose one of your favorite terrain, one type of your favorite terrain, so Arctic, coast, desert, forest, grassland, mountain, swamp, or the Underdark. When you make an intelligence or wisdom check to relate it to your favorite terrain, your proficiency bonus is doubled if you're using a skill that you're proficient in. So basically, if I were to make a nature check, I chose forest, so if I were to make a nature check that pertains to the forest, I could actually double my proficiency bonus. So instead of adding A total of plus, what do we have here for nature? Nature is +4, so I'd be able to add +6. 2 for my wisdom, 2 for proficiency, and another 2 for proficiency if I'm using it for my favorite terrain. In addition, I also, difficult terrain doesn't slow me or my group's travel. My group can't become lost except by magical means, so I can always guide them through the forest. They'll never get lost. Even when you're engaged in another activity while traveling, like foraging, navigating, or tracking, you still remain alert to danger, so you wouldn't have like disadvantage on things like perception checks, for example. If you're traveling alone, you can move stealthily at your normal pace. When you forage, you find twice as much food as you normally would. So my Outlander ability allowed me to forage for food for myself and 5 others, so I guess technically you could do it for up to 12 people. Or your group of 5 plus yourself, whatever it is, will be able to eat twice as good. So, which is kind of interesting. While tracking other creatures, you also learn their exact number, their sizes, and how long ago they passed through the area. So it just means that if we're tracking a band of orcs, for example, if they're going through the forest, I can tell you how many there were and how long ago it had passed through. So, you know, again, that's kind of cool. So those are just the first level abilities there that I get from my class. Really, the last thing left to do is just my armor class and my weapon attacks and damage. So I've already got my weapons filled in here. I've got longbow, short bow, and then, or short sword, sorry, longbow, short sword. And I have a second one there for offhand, which would be the secondary short sword. The reason for that is I can attack with 2 short swords. If I do so in melee, the second one, which I consider to be offhand, I can only roll the straight dice for it, so I wouldn't be able to add any sort of bonus to it. So you don't do as much damage, I guess, with that secondary weapon. So all that we need to do now is go into the equipment section. Alright, and let's have a look at our armors. So here's the list of armors that we have. Just a picture of like a suit. It looks like a suit of plate. And we are wearing leather armor. So that's the one that I chose. So leather armor gives me a armor class of 11 plus my dexterity modifier. So I start with a base of 11. My dexterity modifier is +4. So it gives me a 15 armor class. And now that's it for armor. I don't have a shield. Last thing to do is go into our weapons. So with the weapons, the first one I'm going to do is the longbow because that's my primary weapon. The longbow uses it's a ranged attack, so you use your dexterity modifier, and I'm proficient in it. So it's my dexterity modifier of +4, my proficiency bonus of +2, so my total attack is +6. And a longbow does 1d8 piercing. Now, as a ranged weapon, it also uses my dexterity modifier, so I get to add that to the damage, so it's 1d8 plus 4. I'm just going to put a P in brackets for piercing. Next are our short swords. So the short swords, they're light weapons. They're also finesse weapons, which is kind of important for my elf, because with finesse, you can actually replace the... normally, if you attack with a melee weapon, you're using your strength modifier. If you have finesse, or if it's a finesse weapon, I should say, when you make an attack with it, you can use your strength or your dexterity modifier for the attack and damage rolls, but you must use the same modifier for both. So in this case, I'm going to use my dexterity. So that gives me, once again, +6. So for both of those. And with the short sword, it does 1d6. And again, I'm using my dexterity because I'm using the finesse feature of it. So 1d6 plus 4, and again, that's piercing. And for my offhand, it's simply a d6, so I don't get to add my dexterity modifier for the offhand weapon. But that's basically it. So that was me creating my first level Elven Ranger. So we got all of our ability scores. We have our background stuff. We have all of our racial and class features. We have our equipment. We have our weapons, how much we add a bonus when we attack. So basically you would use the d20. So let's just say I attack something with my longbow. That's not very good, but it's typical roll for me. I rolled a 3, so it's only a 9 total. It's not so great. But let's just say, here we go. So let's just say I attack something the next round. 16 plus 6 would be 22, so that would hit quite a few things in the game. So we've got that. My armor class is 15, so that's how good my defense is. If enemies attack me, their totals have to equal 15 or be greater than 15. My initiative, so how quickly I react in combat, I get a +4 bonus to. The higher the initiative, the quicker you go. So for example, if we're starting a fight, I rolled an 11 there. So 11 plus 4, so I would go on a 15. Anybody that gets a number greater than 15 would go before me, but anybody that got less than 15 would go after me. So that's a pretty good number, I guess. And I have 11 hit points. So it's a D10 or 10 at first level plus my Constitution modifier. So that gives me 10 plus 1 is 11. And of course I have you have your hit dice that you can use when you're resting. So if you are damaged in combat and you're completing a short rest, which takes an hour in the game by default, I could spend a hit dice if I took damage. I would roll a d10 and I would add my Constitution modifier to see what I get back. So let's just say I took 6 points of damage. So I'm down to 5 current hit points. Do a short rest. And a short rest takes just as long, even if you're an elf. It's only the long rest that is half the time. So, well, that's a good roll there. So I got a 9 plus 1, so I would have gained 10 hit points back. If I was reduced to 1 hit point, I would be at max. In this case, I gained all of them back, so I can just erase that damage. And I would be back at full. But we have our speed, which is again part of our race. I can move 35 feet in a round. And that's pretty much it. Now, the basic sheets do have more to them than just that. I don't have any spells, for example, as a first level ranger. So this sheet I didn't really get to use at all. But it just has, you know, what your spellcasting class is. So I would write, oops, ranger. Spellcasting ability for a ranger, as it says in the book, is Wisdom. So we'll just start with that. So there's my class, ability score, your save DC. So even though I don't have any first level spells, it starts at a bonus. It starts at 8 plus your proficiency modifier plus your spellcasting modifier. So right now, if I had any spells that I could cast, if the enemy's got a chance to make saving throws against them, they would have to beat a 12. And I get a total of +4 to if I have any spells that make attacks. Again, I don't have any spells here, but that's just kind of what it looked like if it were filled in. And then, of course, we have our sheet with, you know, a spot for your character sketch. I'm not a very good artist. Allies and organizations, which is big if you're into organized play. So if you remember, like the Harpers is into ARM, stuff like that. Backstory, if you wanted to write a bit of a backstory, there's a spot for it there. Another section for additional features and traits. So as you go up in levels, you know, the little spot that they give you here may not be enough for your full character. So eventually you can kind of spill over to the back page, or you can just do it all on the back page if you wanted to. And a little section for treasure. And of course there's all your basic things like your age, weight, height, stuff like that, which I didn't actually fill in for this video. But anyway, I hope that was helpful. Just some basic ideas of you know, how to create a character. You know, again, I hope it was helpful. You know, I hope you enjoyed the fact that I actually made the character as I did the video instead of just kind of talking about it. Let me know if you liked that or if you found it to be a bit too boring. I hope you didn't. And again, I hope you just enjoyed this video all around. I hope it helped you with your first character. So that's it for this video. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do for a follow-up to this, but I'll try to make at least one more video aimed at players. But for now, we'll just end it here and we'll see what I can do for another video in the future. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, YouTube.